Okay, so I had mentioned before that the last part of the semester, we're looking at topics that social psychologists have looked at in order to try to improve the world, right? We study stereotyping and prejudice so that we can understand it, so that we can try to reduce it in the future. And the same thing is true of aggression. Social psychologists study aggression in large part because we want to try to reduce the amount of aggression in the real world. It has some real world implications, right? So earlier in the semester, in the first or second week, I talked about the importance of having operational definitions. Just to refresh your memory, an operational definition is when we're studying some sort of behavior that's inherently ambiguous. And we need to define it very concretely. Because in science, we need other people to agree with our observations. We need to be working with a consistent definition. And so if you take a behavior like, or something like aggression, well, aggression is very ambiguous. What you consider aggression might be very different from what I consider to be aggression. And so to make sure we're playing on the same field, make sure we're using the same definition, we need an operational definition of aggression. Now, there have been a number of operational definitions that have been used for aggression, but this is one of the most common ones, which is that aggression is considered any form of behavior directed toward the goal of harming or injuring another living being who is motivated to avoid such treatment. Sounds like kind of a mouthful, right? But what you notice is that we're not saying that aggression is simply a laundry list of like punching, kicking, hitting, biting. That's not how we're counting aggression. Okay? Aggression is defined in terms of its motivating factors and in terms of the impact it has on the other people. And in particular, in this operational definition right here, there are four critical components that all have to be present in order for an action to be considered aggression. So, first off, in order for a social psychologist to consider an action aggressive, it has to be a form of behavior in particular. And what that means is that if you simply think about harming another person, we as social psychologists, we're not going to consider that aggression itself. And the reason for this is because we're interested specifically in aggression in the real world that actually harms people. And just thinking something doesn't actually harm another person. So if part of our goal as a social psychologist is to reduce the amount of aggression in the world, then we want to focus on aggression that actually impacts people, which is behavior. So we're only focusing on behavior, not things like thoughts. A second component of this definition of aggression is that it's goal oriented, meaning the person who's committing the aggressive act is trying to harm someone else. There's a goal involved. Okay. So, in other words, if I accidentally elbow someone while I'm playing basketball, that doesn't count as aggression because I didn't mean to hit them. Because again, we want to focus on reducing instances of aggression in the real world in which people are deliberately trying to harm others. And so we're only going to consider behaviors that are goal directed towards harming someone else. Thirdly, the person or the being we're aggressing against, it has to be a living being. It has to be a person or an animal. Now, the reason for this, again, is because if it's not a living being, then no one is actually suffering as a consequence of that behavior. So if I'm by myself and I get angry and I punch a wall, we're not going to count that as aggression because no one was actually harmed by that, except for maybe myself, right? Um, but there's no living being who's actually harmed. Now, if, on the other hand, I'm having an argument with someone and I want to scare them, and I scare them by punching a wall right beside them, now that does count as aggression because there is another person that I'm trying to intimidate, right? And I'm punching it in order to try to scare that person, trying to harm that person in some way. But it has to be, otherwise, it has to be directed towards a living being. And finally, the fourth component of this definition is that that living being has to be motivated to avoid that treatment. In other words, they have to not want that thing to happen to them. So if I punch someone, presumably they don't want to be punched, right? They're motivated to avoid that treatment. On the other hand, if someone asks me to punch them for whatever reason they want to be punched, so for instance, in the movie Fight Club, where Edward Norton's character asks Brad Pitt's character to punch him in the face. No, the opposite. Brad Pitt's character asks Edward Norton's character. In that case, that would not count as aggression because the person on the receiving end, Brad Pitt's character, is not trying to avoid that treatment. Okay, they're not motivated. They want that to happen to them. And again, that's because what we're interested in the real world are instances where people harm others who don't want to be harmed. That's what we're trying to focus on in the real world. So all four of these components are necessary. So what that means is that if we come across some sort of ambiguous behavior and we need to classify that behavior as aggression or not, then the way to do that is to compare that behavior to these four components of this definition. And that behavior has to pass each one of those four components in order for us to qualify it as aggressive. If it fails any one of those four, then we're not going to count it as aggression. And that way, using this definition ensures that all of us will categorize behaviors the exact same way, as aggressive or not. And I want to give you some examples of this. So what I want you to do is, for each of the following examples, I want you to tell me if it counts as aggression or not according to the operational definition I just gave you. So for instance, a hitman kills an unfaithful husband for the unreasonably low price of $1,000. Okay, so does that count as aggression or not? And feel free to answer in the chat, by the way. It just say yes or no. Okay, we got a bunch of no's right out of the gate. Let's look at this. Let's look at the four components of the definition, right? So the first component, is it a behavior? Well, killing someone is a behavior. Sure, that's a behavior, right? Okay. Is there a goal to harm? Well, yeah, your goal is to kill a person, right? So yeah, there's a goal to harm. Is it directed towards a living being? Well, yeah, the husband is a living being, sure. Is that person motivated to avoid that treatment? Well, yeah, they don't want to be killed, right? So you answered yes to each of those four components. That means that it is aggression, yes. Now, I think that some people might be saying no. I think because the hitman's doing it for money. They're not doing it because they hate the husband. They're doing it for money, let's say. But that doesn't matter. That's not part of our operational definition. There's no part of our definition that says that it only counts as aggression if you hate the other person. All our definition says is that there has to be a goal to harm. But the hitman has a goal to harm even if it's for money. So what you're going to see, though, if you answered no to that for that reason, what we're going to see is that you're anticipating a distinction between hostile and instrumental aggression, something we're going to talk about next class briefly. Let's look at number 2. A jealous man kills his wife and lover. Is that aggression or not? Okay, this one's pretty obvious, right? Everyone says yes. Sure. Is it a behavior? Yes. Is there a goal to harm? Yes. Directed towards a living being? Yes. 2 living beings in this case. Yes. Are those people motivated to avoid it? Yes. So we count it as aggression. Okay, those ones are fairly easy. The next few get a little trickier. So a prison ward, executes a criminal. Someone gets the death penalty. Does that count as aggression or not? This one's a little trickier, right? Okay, most people saying yes. Okay, a couple no's, most people saying yes. So let's go through the definition. Is it a behavior? You're killing someone, yeah, that's a behavior. Is there a motivation to harm? Yeah, you're trying to kill someone. Is it against a living being? Yep, it's a criminal, or a criminal is a living being. Is that person motivated to avoid it? Presumably that criminal does not want to be killed, so yeah, they're motivated to avoid it. So yes, that counts as aggression. So even though it's legal to do this, it still counts as aggression according to that definition. A depressed person commits suicide, aggression or not? Okay, so a bunch of no's here. So let's see. Is it a behavior? Yep. Is there a motivation to harm? Yep. Is it directed towards a living being? Yep. Is that living being motivated to avoid it? No, they're not motivated to avoid it, right? They want to die, in other words. Because they're not motivated to avoid it, this does not count as aggression. Number 5, a man mentally rehearses a murder. Is that aggression or not? Okay, lots of no's right out of the gate here. Okay, why is it not aggression? It's pretty obvious. It's not a behavior, right? Mentally rehearsing, thinking about a murder does not count as aggression because it's not a behavior that you're engaged in. And yeah, I mean, there's no living being. It's just kind of an imagined being. Yeah. Number 6, a hunter kills an animal for a trophy. Okay, mostly yeses. Let's see. Is it a behavior? Yep. Motivated to harm? Yep. Trying to kill. Against a living being, an animal counts as a living being. Is that animal motivated to avoid it? Well, yeah, the animal may not understand what's happening, but they certainly wouldn't want it to happen if they were to understand it, right? So they don't want to be killed. So yes, that counts as aggression. Number 7, a Girl Scout tries to help an elderly woman cross the street but trips her by accident. Is that aggression? Okay, that's pretty obviously no. And why is this not aggression? Well, this one's pretty easy. There's no motivation to harm, right? There's no goal to harm. The Girl Scout is not trying to harm the elderly woman, it just accidentally tripped her. That does not count as aggression. 8, a person punches a hole in the wall in anger. Okay. Mostly no's. It kind of depends a little bit. By default, I would say no, because there's no living being that it's being aimed against, right? If you just punch a hole in the wall. Unless you're doing it to scare someone else, in which case you're punching a hole to intimidate that person, then it could be counted as aggression. But without that caveat in there, just punching a hole in the wall does not count as aggression because there's no living being that's being harmed. Number 9, one person calls another a racial slur. Is that aggression or not? Okay, got a bunch of yeses. So let's go through it. Is it a behavior? Yep, calling someone a name is a behavior. Is there a goal to harm? Yep, probably trying to harm them emotionally. Is it against a living being? Yes. Is that living being motivated to avoid being harmed in that way? Yes. So there's nothing in the definition of aggression that says it has to be physical, right? It could be calling someone names, for instance. That's another type of aggression because it meets all 4 points of that definition. 2 more and I'll let you go. A person slams a door shut after an argument. I'll just do this one quickly because this is almost identical to number 8. If you slam a door shut after an argument, it sort of depends on your motivation. If you're just slamming a door shut because you're angry, it doesn't count as aggression because there's no goal to harm someone else. If you're slamming a door shut in order to scare the other person, in order to intimidate them, then it would count as aggression. So it completely depends on the motivation for that behavior, for why they're slamming the door shut. Okay, last one, I'll let you go. Bob tries to shoot Rick, but misses Rick and hits Tom instead. Is that aggression or not? Well, for this one, it depends because there's 2 different acts that are going on here, and you need to break down that act exactly towards who. That's what you've got to figure out. So let's look at it. There's Bob's actions towards Rick, and there's Bob's actions towards Tom. Bob's actions towards Rick is that he tries to shoot him but misses, right? Well, let's see. Is that a behavior? Well, yeah, he shot at him. Is there a goal to harm Rick? Yeah, he tried to kill him. Is that person a living being? Yep, Rick's a living being. Is Rick motivated to avoid it? Yep, he is. So therefore, you meet all 4 parts of the definition. That behavior of shooting at Rick, it does count as aggression, even if you don't actually hit Rick. On the other hand, if you look at Bob's behavior towards Tom, so he accidentally shoots Tom. Well, is that a behavior? Yes. Is there a goal to harm Tom? No. There's no goal to harm Tom. It's an accident. So in that case, Bob's behavior towards Tom is not aggression. So what this shows is that aggression does not, or it's not the ultimate outcome that determines whether it's aggression, because Tom got shot and Rick didn't, and yet the aggression is against Rick and not Tom. It's not the ultimate outcome that matters. It's the goal to harm that matters in this case, that determines if something's aggression or not. Okay, I'm a couple minutes over, so I'm going to stop things.